Diabolus in Musica. The music I cherish, as well as the type that I write, can be categorized as bombastic music for the symphony orchestra. Historically, this type of composition, using the orchestra for grand emotional expression as well as time scale, began with Beethoven. I here present profiles of several major composers whose work I find to be deeply rewarding. They are worthy of your attention. Ludwig van Beethoven. Despite the prevailing cultural literacy, is there anyone out there who hasn't heard the name of the mighty Beethoven? And who is not familiar with the famous four-note motif, 3 shorts and a long, that begin his incomparable Fifth Symphony? Who still recalls what that symbolized in Morse code during World War II? Yet how many of you have taken the time to explore the works of one of the titans of music, whose compositions combined emotional heights and formal brilliance at a level that few have approached? Beethoven was the prototype for the maverick composer who told his patrons what he wanted to do, rather than vice versa. Unlike Mozart, who enjoyed his life but was constantly having to do what his patrons wanted. The youthful Beethoven was hailed by Mozart as one who would make a stir in the world. Beethoven was thus accepted into aristocratic circles and was supported by wealthy music financiers who tolerated his gruff manner and often unkempt appearance. In 1798, he became aware of a progressive loss of hearing and finally became completely deaf by 1819. Despite this tragic handicap, he continued to produce works that expanded Western music to new heights of achievement, and he maintained his love of existence through all of these, choosing to celebrate the forces of life in the face of his own tragedy. The dark current flowed through his being so strongly that he could continue, despite the extinguishing of his sense to perceive the results of his efforts. The sound world that existed in his imagination went directly down on paper for performers to later recreate so that we can share Beethoven's musical visions. Beethoven turned his efforts to just about every genre of music that was extant in his time, transforming and expanding each of them from chamber music and art songs to concerti, large-scale vocal works, and symphonies. The emotional hallmark to be found in all of these is a heroic sense of struggle and victory. The personal I making a direct assault on the universe and bending things to its will. Though Beethoven did write works on Christian texts, his Missa Solemnis being a prime example, he generally seemed to be more attracted to works by Schiller and Goethe for inspiration, as well as Greek mythological tales. It is perhaps best to start one's exploration of Beethoven's music with his symphonies. His Third Symphony, subtitled Eroica, was originally dedicated to Napoleon. He failed to live up to Beethoven's concepts of what an enlightened leader should accomplish, so his name was removed from the dedication page. This symphony amazed audiences at the time for being about half again as long as any previous work in this genre, but Beethoven needed this enlarged timescale to explore his concept of the hero, who is carried to the grave in the funeral march of the second movement. His Fourth Symphony was on a smaller scale, but with Symphony No. 5 he achieved the masterpiece. It details in an amazingly compact way the struggle through to victory, and every movement, from the driven first through to the soaringly triumphant finale emerging from a shadowy transition, is based on the opening motto. Symphony No. 6, Pastoral, revels in a purely pagan appreciation of nature, with Beethoven creating images of brooks, bird calls, a rainstorm, and a peasant wedding. but really depicting the glorious emotions he felt by reflecting on the beauty of nature, culminating in the final movement's hymn to nature. Symphony No. 7 intensely examines rhythm, concluding with a Dionysian dance. Symphony 8 is compact and full of wit and humor. The renowned Ninth Symphony is his largest. The first movement was unlike anything written before, being colossal in sound. The scherzo is fugal and developed in sonata fashion, and its movement is like the dancing of infernal flames. The lyrical adagio provides a soothing respite before the expanded finale. For the first time, this concluding movement included a chorus and vocal soloists in a celebration based on the never-to-be-forgotten Ode to Joy. I suggest that you seek out the recordings by John Eliot Gardner of the Orchestre Révolutionnaire et Romantique, as he uses Beethoven's tempo markings, and the ensemble of original instruments preserves the proper orchestral balance, making the detailed part writing crystal clear. These pieces will repay repeated listening. They are to music what Shakespeare's plays are to literature. They are to music what Shakespeare's plays are to literature. Start off with the Fifth Symphony, and partake of a sound world embodying man, the prideful hero. None of that Christian groveling here. You'll be swept along in a current of upward motion, of evolution, of titanic battle and ultimate triumph. Here the dark force in nature has been given an oral existence. Hail Ludwig! Hail Ludwig! Anton Bruckner. He taught Mahler and is renowned as a Roman Catholic composer, considered a social misfit and often viewed as a country bumpkin. Bruckner became a sorcerer when improvising at the pipe organ or when composing his massive contrapuntually complex symphonies. His focus was on the power he understood to be the source of the universe, not on Jesus as a savior. Not on Jesus as a savior. His symphonies are powerfully monumental, with prominent brass writing and organ-like sonority. The qualities most often felt in his work are nobility and majesty. Try Symphony No. 4 to start, called the Romantic. If you find it inspiring, go on to No. 5, No. 7, 8, and 9. Bruckner's style doesn't change, but his expertise and complexity increase over the course of his compositions. Herbert von Karajan is an excellent interpreter, but Kurt Eichhorn and Gunther Wand also do splendidly. Gustav Mahler. He composed one of the most dramatic and complex series of symphonies ever conceived. They are my favorites. 9 were completed, while the 10th was unfinished at the time of his death, but there are completions by musicologists, and they are excellent. The song cycle symphony Das Lied von der Erde preceded his 9th symphony, and Mahler himself saw it as an unnumbered symphony. As a student, he was passionately interested in Nietzsche and adored Wagner, and his major life career was one of the world's leading conductors, celebrated for his detailed interpretations of Wagner and Mozart. His work grows progressively more complex over the course of his career, so it is often well to start with his Symphony No. 1. It evokes nature in the first movement, has an earthy peasant dance for a scherzo, a mocking funeral march for the slow movement, and an apocalyptic/triumphant finale. His Symphony No. 2 is subtitled Resurrection, but it isn't what one would expect from the Christian point of view. Mahler intended it to symbolize his own artistic triumph over negative critical response, and it takes the paradigm of Beethoven's Ninth to greater lengths and depths. His third symphony is the longest, and it embodies Mahler's love of raw pagan nature. Love of raw pagan nature. The first movement is gigantic and pictures the awakening of Pan and the volcanic paroxysm of life's struggle. The following 5 movements take one on an evolutionary journey through several worlds of plant life, of animals, of loneliness. A setting of a Nietzsche text, of naive religion, and finally of deep human passion. The middle group of purely orchestral symphonies is complex and exciting. The 5th begins with a funeral march and finally ends in a raucous triumph based on a melody he wrote for a song that lampooned people with unsophisticated tastes. The tragic 6th Symphony is one of the darkest pieces ever written, ending with a vast movement interrupted by actual sledgehammer blows, shattering the symbolic hero of the piece. The 7th is sometimes called the Song of the Night, and it evokes the night in many guises. His 8th is another vast choral symphony, called at the premiere the Symphony of 1,000, because of the gigantic forces needed to perform it. Mahler goes back to Bach for contrapuntual thinking and sets a text invoking the creative spirit, and then moving on to a setting of the final scene of Goethe's Faust. His 9th, written under the spectre of declining health, is a sophisticated leave-taking, wrenchingly despairing, then finally, resignedly detached. The unfinished 10th goes even further in its despair, but finally concludes with the cherishing love of having lived. Hyper-emotionalism is the rule in this music. If you like this, then keep going on with the rest of the symphonies in order. Give them time and attention, for it is repaid. Get Leonard Bernstein's recordings, either the old on Sony or the new on Deutsche Grammophon. Diabolus Musica, Part 1.